Wache. Welcome to Lakehead University's Reconcili-action, Learning Truths and Enacting Responsibilities opening event for our Truth and Reconciliation 2-week-long plan of events over the next 2 weeks. We are happy that you're able to join us. Denise Baxter and Dishnikoz, Makwadodum, Martin Falls, and Donjaba. My name is Denise Baxter, Vice Provost, Indigenous Initiatives at Lakehead University, and I am happy to be your MC for the event today. Lakehead remains committed as part of its commitment to social justice and social responsibility to advance the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action and Universities Canada's principles on Indigenous education. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommends to build capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. This has become a guiding principle for the commitments Lakehead has made in both Northwestern Ontario and Simcoe County, and I will continue to guide our efforts in the future. Before we begin, I would like to share an important notice of video audio recording of the Reconcili-action, Learning Truths and Enacting Responsibilities event. Participants are reminded that this online event is being recorded. We are doing this to publicize and preserve a record of the event in the university's archives and to publicize and promote Lakehead University. By attending, you are agreeing to be included in the recording and its public dissemination in any media now known or later developed anywhere in the world in perpetuity. Thank you for joining us. It is now my pleasure to introduce Elder Beatrice Twans-Hines from Biktagong First Nation, who will share an opening prayer.
Oh, bonjour, minwag jem do, mashonsak no pesak tanaway maginak, wabishko, bebijkoji, manitoy quay Indijnikas, getchimigizi quay Indijnikas, gaye, makwa, dudim. Gakina, ebenonjiak, apitenda, duze. Hello again, Creator, grandfathers, grandmothers, all my relations. My name is Whitehorse Spirit Woman. I'm also called Big Eagle Woman, and I'm from the Bear Clan, and I'm from Biktagong First Nation near Pit River, and my given name is Beatrice. Every child matters. So Creator, I'd like to thank you for the gift of today. Thank you for our guest speaker today, Dr. Lynn, Gehl, and pray for good 2 weeks and good teachings that'll come from it, those truths and reconciliation. And we pray for all of us who are affected by residential schools and the impacts, and for those little ones from graves that were found. They are bringing us together. They're helping us bring out those truths and the pain that a lot of us are carrying. So Creator, miigwech, 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 miigwech.
Miigwech, Elder Beatrice, for opening us in a very good way and a kind way and a guiding reminder of to why we're coming together every day when we come together, but particularly today. I would like to introduce now President and Vice Chancellor of Lakehead University, Dr. Maura McPherson.
Thank you very much, Denise and Chimagwich, Elder Beatrice, for helping us begin today's event and with those important words. Bonjour and welcome, everyone. And I would also like to extend a warm welcome to Chief Peter Collins of Fort William First Nation, who I think will be joining us shortly, and also to Chief Ted Williams of the Chippewas of Rama First Nation. It is an honor to be with both of you on your territories this morning. Lakehead is committed to demonstrating respect and recognition for Indigenous peoples and to honoring the people and the lands upon which we reside. Today marks the opening of 2 weeks of focused learning about truths and about furthering our own responsibilities towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. We are fortunate to have many outstanding speakers, guests such as Dr. Gehl today, as well as Lakehead faculty and staff to help us along this journey of reconciliation and learning. It is a time for listening, reflection, and for discussion. The presenters will lead us through sessions focusing on the work that we have to do, both as a post-secondary institution, but also as individuals and as part of a broader ongoing community effort to support Indigenous self-determination and decision-making through relevant teaching, learning, research, and other types of activities over these weeks. There will be opportunities to participate in the Kairos blanket exercise, to sit and learn by the sacred fire, and to engage in language learning. You are all invited to visit the Winiskatan exhibit, an impactful display designed to bring greater awareness about murdered and missing women, girls, and Two-Spirit peoples, which will be in the Agora until October the 8th. The work of reconciliation is not easy work. I was listening to the Honorable Murray Sinclair on the weekend, and he reminded listeners of how much change is still needed, and change that is needed on so many different levels. I believe that together we can be part of that change. Thank you, Miigwech.
Miigwech, President McPherson. I would like to invite and introduce Chief Ted Williams of the Chippewa-Rama First Nation. Chief Ted Williams is of the Fish Clan and Ojibwe from the Chippewa-Rama First Nation, a proud husband of 42 years and a father of 2. And we're very pleased to have Chief Williams joining us today. Chief Williams?
Miigwech, Denise, Miigwech, Aning Bujo, Chief Gima Ted Williams, Indigenous Rama Jikin Donjaba, Gigo Dodem, Chief Ted Williams, Chippewas of Rama Fish Clan. It certainly is an honor for me to be invited and to be in the presence of all of the attendees today. Miigwech, Elder Beatrice, for your opening words and words of wisdom, and thanks for your opening today. 2 weeks that Lakehead has set aside to understand, to learn, to listen. I'm very pleased to be associated with Lakehead University. Lakehead is a leader in post-secondary education, not just in Thunder Bay, not just in Aurelia, but in the global university world. And Lakehead is also a leader in learning and acknowledging the issues, past and present, that we as Indigenous people face and have faced. And I want to say miigwech for your leadership in that regard. It's always good to be invited to participate in your various activities and curriculum, and we give thanks and miigwech for the contributions and the understanding that you have committed to. With that, I just want to say have a good day, have a good couple of weeks of learning, and it doesn't stop in 2 weeks. It's a continuous learning exercise, and thank you for providing this forum. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief Williams. I would like to introduce Chief Peter Collins of the Fort William First Nation. Chief Peter Collins is currently serving in his 10th term as Chief of Fort William First Nation. We are very privileged to be able to be residing on this territory. I am at this moment, and I would like to welcome Chief Collins of Fort William First Nation and MQSU. Chief Collins.
Good afternoon, Denise, and thank you for the invite. Sorry I'm late joining, but just finishing up other meetings, trying to take care of everybody's every issue that I have in front of me. To the university, Dr. McPherson, to Beatrice, I missed your opening prayer, and I apologize for that. As I suspect, it was a beautiful one, beautiful prayers, and as usual, Beatrice usually starts with a beautiful song. So I suspect I missed that too. So, but nonetheless, I'm here. I'm always honored to be a part of the events at the university. I think it's an important aspect of who we are, where the university is located. I know the event today is the kickoff of a 2-week education process around truth and reconciliation, but truth and reconciliation is a long-term educational process. Even for me, as long as I've been around, I've been learning about, the residential school impacts and the educational process that goes along with that. Truth and reconciliation means a lot to us as First Nation communities and First Nation people, the many commitments that we have made to this great country that we call Canada, and to ourselves as First Nation folks. We have to continue on that path. It's every day is a new learning curve, as I've been mindful of that. When I first got elected in 1998 as chief in the community, I had one of our long-serving employees sit me down one day and said, "Listen, you're not going to learn everything today. You're not going to learn everything in a week. You're not going to learn everything in a month. You'll be learning forever." She said it's an educational process that you'll continue to go through life with. I still get that educational process every other day in my tenure as a chief, but it's always rewarding to learn new things and continue on that path. So, but I know we have a lot of work to do on truth and reconciliation, and it's a very long and lengthy road. Over the next 2 weeks, it'll be a lot of work in front of you to get an understanding of what that really means. And I think it's an important aspect. First of all, it's always a pleasure being a part of the educational process. I feel like I've been in the university over the last couple of weeks more often than not, but it's always important to be a part of it. So I thank the opportunity. Thank you, Dr. McPherson, to the faculty at the university. Denise, always nice to see you. Chief Ted Williams, always a pleasure to see you too. Again, in saying that, on behalf of my council, my community, I welcome you to the beautiful land of Fort William, the treaty territory of Fort William First Nation. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. Always a pleasure. We are thrilled to be able to begin this week, and I think it is important to note, as was noted by all of our speakers, that this is an ongoing process, an ongoing, like 52 weeks a year work that we do, but we are really just putting a spotlight on the work to focus it for the next 2. So we really do appreciate you all joining us today. I see we have 86 people on the Zoom with us as I introduce my colleague who will be taking over for the next section of this event today. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lana Ray, our newly anointed Indigenous Research Chair in Decolonial Futures at Lakehead University and Assistant Professor in Indigenous Learning. Dr. Ray.
Miigwech, Denise. Bojo waskini gija gog nindago ajal kanoji nadodama paganisna nadunjaba. So I just wanted to not take up too much time, but just say a couple of words. And first, I want to thank Elder Beatrice Twance for her opening, and to everyone else for their really thoughtful and insightful comments. So we're here today largely because of the unmarked graves that were found of really thousands of our children. And when we hear about that, it may be hard for people to comprehend, and something that people may be thinking about is, how could we let this happen? How could people let that happen at that point in time? But I want us to also think about that For us as Anishinaabe people, time isn't linear. And I want to challenge everyone to think about the fact that we still are very much still in that time. So all of those circumstances that created a space for the Indian residential schools to exist still exist now today. So we are still dealing with settler colonialism, we're still dealing with racism, we're still dealing with white supremacy, and we are still seeing our children discriminated against. And so we as a country, even collectively, right, re-elected a leader who chose to actually abstain from emotion. That said, we aren't going to fight against Indigenous kids. We are going to recognize these graves, and we are going to work to end this discrimination against Indigenous children today. So there's a lot of work to be done. And that responsibility doesn't just fall on the shoulders of Indigenous peoples, but there's a huge role and responsibility there for non-Indigenous peoples in what is now known as Canada as well. And so with that said, I really couldn't think of anyone better on Turtle Island to help us start thinking about how we do that in a good way than Dr. Lynn Gehl. And so Dr. Lynn Gehl she's many things, including an author, an advocate, a public speaker, and an artist. And she does both anti-colonial work as well as works and is grounded within Anishinaabe knowledges. So she's, challenged Canada's practices, policies, and laws of colonial genocide, such as the land claims and self-government process within her own traditional territory in Kikpatik. She's also been a strong defender and advocate of the rights of Indigenous women to not be discriminated against in the Indian Act and in other ways, as well as a strong advocate of fighting for people with disabilities. And so she's a prolific author. She has a number of books, including The Truth That Wampum Tells about the Algonquin land claims process, Claiming Anishinaabe, Decolonizing the Human Spirit, as well as most recently, Gehl versus Canada, Challenging Sex Discrimination in the Indian Act. And so if people aren't aware, some of Dr. Lynn Gehl's life work will dramatically change the lives of many Indigenous women and children across Turtle Island as she won her court case against the Queen on unknown and unstated paternity. So it's my great pleasure at this time to introduce Dr. Lynn Gehl.
Thank you, Lana, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to the president and to the chiefs and to everyone for all those openings. They were certainly humbling. So now I have to make sure that I can step up to the fry bread. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Can it be seen? Can people see it? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we can.
I'm going to flip to the slideshow. So, okay, here goes. I have a slideshow. It's about 30 slides. I understand that I could be cut short, and that's okay. So once again, I'm really happy to speak today and talk about reconciliation and allyship. So when I say that honoring the relationship, I mean honoring the relationship between reconciliation and allyship. But it could also mean honoring all relationships that we have. So before I begin, I would really like to infuse my knowledge with my work with Indigenous knowledge. And so before I begin, it's important that I talk about who I am, because our truths come from within ourselves. That's truth with a small t. So Indigenous knowledge to me is really important in the ways that it brings different ways of knowing to the knowledge feasting table. So for example, we respect subjective knowledge, objective knowledge, experiential knowledge, emotional knowledge, reasoned knowledge, practice knowledge, and of course, moral knowledge. So it's important that people understand that these are the type of ways of knowing that I draw from. And I call that the knowledge feasting table. That there is a piece of my art. It's called Urban Feast. It's a collage I did. So again, Deboywen is a really important concept of truth. And so just to tell you more, I'm an Algonquin from Pikwakanagan First Nation. I'm from Toronto, but I reside in Peterborough. I have a vision disability. I have a PhD in Indigenous Studies on the Algonquin land claim process, an MA on identity politics, an undergraduate in cultural anthropology, a diploma in chemical technology. My court case went on for like 30 years. It was Gehl versus Canada. And I worked in the environmental science field monitoring Ontario's waters. So the reason I tell you that again is so you know where my truth is coming from, but also so you understand that the knowledge I pull from, or the knowledge I've gained pulled from these very deep contexts versus, you know, sitting as an armchair Indigenous person, for example. And there's the ancient scroll Deboywen Mikan Chichigawing that talks about the importance of the circle of heart knowledge as well as the circle of mind knowledge, and that for truth to exist, they have to both be there. Then I show you some images there of my art. For example, in the top right corner, I made a petroform in my backyard. So it's important that I tell you that I'm not a feminist. I'm actually an Indigenous. And what that means is I put Indigenous people and Indigenous knowledge at the core of what I do. And it's also values that Indigenous knowledge respects the fact that our knowledge tries to, attempts to, gains to sit closer to the creator and the creator's law. So we're sitting closer to the naturalistic paradigm versus the humanistic paradigm. That's really important to understand when you're thinking about Indigenous knowledge and reconciliation, that we are a different paradigm. So before I discuss, my discussion begins, beware that you may encounter some cognitive dissonance, and that's because paradigm shifting is both a conceptual process you have to go through as well as an emotional process you go through. And so you may want to keep in mind the two-row wampum belt and the non-interference philosophy of peace, friendship, and respect. It's really important as you move forward in your reconcili-action practices and in your allyship practices. So I also want to begin by saying that the Truth and Reconciliation report stated that, you know, Indigenous people have suffered from physical genocide, biological genocide, and cultural genocide. And that cultural genocide continues today. So in the past, our land was seized and it continues to be seized. Our languages were banned, our spiritual leaders were prosecuted. So there was a lot of things that happened, and the TRC called it what it is: physical genocide, biological genocide, and cultural genocide. And the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women provided a legal analysis, a really depthful 50-page legal analysis of genocide. And they drew on the best scholars internationally on genocide. And one of the things I was thinking about with the issue of genocide was, do we have to prove that the state had the intent to commit genocide? And once I read this report from the MMIW, I came to understand that intent is not important when the state, the nation state, is guilty of genocide. What is important is their pattern of behavior and the outcome. And the MMIW said it's time to call it for what it is: Canada's past and current colonial policies, actions, and inactions toward Indigenous people is genocide. So that's something that we no longer debate. It's accepted. Regardless of what the politicians say, it's no longer debatable. So then I want to draw from my Allied Bill of Responsibilities. So during the height of the Idle No More effort, I was in this place where I thought, gee, I would really like to contribute something constructive to this effort because it's such an important effort. So I sat down and I wrote this Allied Bill of Responsibilities. And it's a fancy name to give it some currency. And it did do that. It did gain some currency. The MMIW report even cited it. So my Allied Bill of Responsibility has many items in it, and I'm just going to go over a few of them for settler people to use to guide them. And so the first thing I say, it's important that you not act out of guilt, but rather out of genuine interest in challenging the larger oppressive power structures. And settler people and good allies need to understand that they are secondary to the Indigenous people they're working with and who they seek to serve. They must take a back seat. In settler people, they have to be fully grounded in their own ancestral history and culture. Otherwise, the wannabe syndrome could be an interfering factor. Good allies, good settlers, they are aware of their privileges and openly discuss them because it helps them perceive and understand the structures that served them. Then they can more properly challenge them and question them. And settler allies involved in reconciliation practices really need to embrace their ignorance and hold that in the forefront of their mind and not assume that they know better than Indigenous people who've lived the reality of colonization. So number 10 here, I have it highlighted. So what I think is really important for settler ally and people who are interested in reconciliation practices is to understand that they have to meet the needs of the most oppressed. So for example, women, children, elderly, and young girls and boys. And of course, persons with disabilities. Indigenous people have a higher rate of disabilities because of poor water and poor land. So you really need to stand behind the more oppressed people, the people who really need help. So another one is, I think good allies need to reflect on the dynamics of lateral violence and not encourage it and not benefit from it. It's really important that lateral violence is very thick in our communities. Good allies engaged in reconciliation practices, they don't take up resources, physical or financial, from oppressed groups. They really need to be conscious of that. And they don't take up time at community members. They're there to listen. And number 16, they accept the responsibility of continually learning about decolonization and reconciliation. So I also blog. My goal is to reach community people and not just the academics. And so this is another catchy thing I came up with. A colonized ally meets a decolonized ally, and this is what they learned. And so a colonized ally will stand in front, but a decolonized ally will stand behind. Some people don't understand that because they think they're supposed to stand beside us. And my position is no, they stand behind us and push us forward. And when we're equal, then they can stand beside us. Number 4, a colonized ally wants knowledge now, whereas a decolonized ally values their own relationship to the knowledge. And really, I have to say, they value reciprocity. A colonized ally projects guilt, whereas a decolonized ally knows it's their work to do. So my slide is a little missing there, so I'm just going to go on. This is a great image I like. It's a settler person saying, I benefit from colonization, and then an Indigenous person who says, I don't. It's very effective. So in moving on, a colonized ally has no respect for Indigenous intellectuals, but a decolonized ally knows that we have our own intellectuals. A colonized ally has no idea that they need to decolonize, whereas a decolonized ally understands they have to continually decolonize and reflect on their behaviors and their thinking and their actions. Number 14, a colonized ally will make things worse, whereas a decolonized ally will understand the difficulty of the context that they're in. And a colonized ally will loathe this truth that I'm offering, whereas a decolonized ally will understand that I'm taking a lot of risks in telling these kind of truths. So, and moving on, there's a couple of really nice images I like about allyship and reconciliation. This one here is a little bit controversial. It's a debauchement, meaning it's a personal story. A lot of people don't quite understand that the way you look at our leaders and the way you look at men in the community and the way you look at even women in the community and elders, you really need to pay attention to your gaze, because your gaze can be interrupting the relationship community people, Indigenous community people have with their own elders. Because, for example, I've seen settler people look at leaders in our community with adore and love and worship. And for me, for example, I want to have a genuine relationship with my leadership. And when they encounter me and I don't look at them with adore and love, it's a little bit confusing for them. So your gaze can be interfering. It's really important that you pay attention to that. The last thing settler allies want to do, engaging in reconciliation practices, is to fortify another oppressive patriarchy. We really don't need that. And I think it's really important for people to understand, for settler women to stand behind settler women. So this is on my website. It's very controversial. It'll cause some people some cognitive dissonance, but it's important that people pay attention to their gaze. So this is really important to me. A lot of people don't know who are engaged in allyship and reconciliation. They forget to realize, or they don't realize, that you can be groomed. Allies are groomed, right? So abusers are just as good at grooming allies as they are at grooming victims. So that's really important to understand that. In taking on reconciliation practices, you have to have the courage to be disliked. Really need to you're going to be taking some risks. You're going to be standing up. Cindy Blackstock calls that moral courage. So we need more settlers engaged in acts that require moral courage. You need to accept the fact that you may not be liked in what you're doing and what you're saying. This is a really useful thing. I really like it. It talks about how, this man, Eduardo, he says he doesn't believe in charity. He believes in solidarity, because charity is vertical, but solidarity is horizontal. So that's really an important thing to consider. Things like false generosity, we don't need false generosity. You need to allow us to define what we need. You do not get to define what we need. And fake naivete, as oppressed people, we are very, very keen and aware of fake naivete. And there's a lot of discussion right now about pretendians, and I would say there's a lot of pretend allies. And you can be sure that oppressed people are aware when you're pretending to be an ally, just like we are aware when somebody's pretending to be an Indian. So reconciliation is more than a party. It's more than a settler's false hope. And by that, I mean, a lot of settlers will say, oh, it's just so great and wonderful that we're moving towards reconciliation. But at the level of practice, it's not happening. And so it's really just a settler's false hope. And that to me is the form of appropriation. And it's really important that people understand that reconciliation is more than about your entertainment, your social activity, more than your education, and it's more than a coffee club. Reconciliation is genuine practices that serve Indigenous people as we define it to be. So anyone who wants to learn more about reconciliation practices, they can go to the Truth and Reconciliation report, which provided 94 calls to action. Everybody, it's available online. You just have to go Google it. What I'm going to pull out here is 43, section 43 and 44, where they talk about the need for Canada to meet the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is a framework for reconciliation, and they need to develop a national plan. So we've done our work is the point here. In here, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, they provided 231 calls for justice. So again, we have done our work. They're out there, everyone can access them. I really like 16.1 because it talks about the need for everybody, for academic institutions, even bloggers, film producers, I'm going to add poets, writers. We all need to engage in decolonizing practices that serve to us LGBTQIA people. And of course, I'm going to add there Indigenous women and girls with disabilities. And what is great about the MMIW is they actually provided some suggestions for all Canadians. So for example, they say, we ask all Canadians to denounce and speak out against violence against Indigenous women and girls, to decolonize by learning the true history of Canada, and to use what you've learned and some of the resources suggested, become a strong ally. So MMIW is asking you to become a strong ally. And MMIW is asking people to confront and speak out against racism, sexism, ignorance, homophobia, and transphobia, and teach and encourage others to do the same, and to hold the government accountable to these calls for justice. Essentially, the MMIW is asking you to become a change maker. So I'm going to go back to the UNDRIP, because the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People received royal assent here in Canada just recently, like June 21st, 2020. And in the UNDRIP, it says that we have a right not to be subjected to forced assimilation. And we have a right not to be dispossessed of our land, territories, and resources. And UNDRIP also says that states should be giving legal recognition and protection of our lands and territories. And then they also say, it also says that we're entitled to proper compensation for our lands and resources. So just to give you an example, you know, Justin Trudeau came in on the idea that no relationship was more important to him than the one between Canada and Indigenous people. And so, and considering that the UNDRIP has just passed in legislation, you would think that we would see a shift in the mandates of what Canada and Ontario are offering. For example, the Algonquins. They're only offering the Algonquins, it's been updated to 1.7% of our traditional territory, and an $800 million buyout, a one-time buyout. So they're not even willing to share the resources. And so what I'm saying here is it's about time that Canada move beyond the rhetoric and put that right into practice, and value that we need our land and resources. And we haven't seen that yet in the Algonquin process. So right now, it's just a bunch of rhetoric coming from the federal government. If anybody is interested in learning more about Indigenous knowledge, I also produced an Indigenous Knowledge Protection Act to help people to conceptualize what is Indigenous knowledge. What a lot of people don't quite understand is Indigenous knowledge predates human arrival. And a lot of people struggle with that because they're in the humanistic paradigm versus the naturalistic paradigm. You know, the trees were here first, the water was here first, and they all had knowledge before humans came along. So it's really important. It's also important for settler people engaging in reconciliation practices to learn the difference between an anti-colonial knowledge and Indigenous knowledge. A lot of people cannot decipher the difference between anti-colonial knowledge and Indigenous knowledge. They are different and they're both important, but it's important that you reflect on what are they and how do they differ. I also like to talk about intersectional oppression because Indigenous people they sit under many layers of structural oppression, such as sexism, racism, and ableism. And Kimberly Crenshaw, she developed the concept of intersectional oppression. And intersectional oppression doesn't mean a crossroads where three things meet. What she means by that is when people sit under multiple layers of oppression, the structures interact and interfere and aggravate the person's life at a level that is greater than the sum of its parts. Because it's much like medicines, you know, medical doctors will say, don't take these drugs together because they can kill you. They can interact and kill you. So it's very similar to intersectional oppression. So it's important that settler people understand intersectional oppression, and both conceptually and at the level of practice. What does that mean? It means we have a more difficult life. It means we live a more frustrating life, a more depressed life, a more angry life. So, and we need that to be understood. Here's a nice diagram I created to help people understand what happens when you're under the three levels of structural oppression. It makes for a harder life, a much more miserable life. Miigwech for listening and learning.
Miigwech, Lynn, Dr. Gehl, there was so much in that short amount of time. And some of the things that I pulled, definitely the need to center Indigenous peoples and Indigenous knowledges when thinking about how we go about reconciliation, and lots of great resources as well. Someone had a question of if resources will be available. So Dr. Gehl's presentation will be posted on the Indigenous Initiatives website, but I also want to encourage everyone when thinking about centering Indigenous voices, Dr. Gehl also has a website herself, which includes many of the resources that you see here within the presentation today. So I'm just looking, I don't see any questions yet. I'm thinking it's probably because there was so much rich information there for people to process and take in. So it may take a couple of minutes for a question to come in, but maybe in the interim, I could start with a question. So you had talked a little bit about non-Indigenous peoples having to take a back seat. And I'm wondering if you could touch upon that a little bit more. So I guess my thought process for this question is, I think sometimes maybe that understanding gets misconstrued. And I sometimes hear non-Indigenous people, settlers say, well, I don't want to do anything. It's not my place to do anything. So what is the role then of non-Indigenous peoples? Is there places, you had also mentioned the difference or distinction between Indigenous knowledge and anti-colonial approaches and knowledges. So are there places where non-Indigenous peoples, it is appropriate for them to perhaps take more of a leadership role?
Sure, I think that their leadership, they should take a leadership role in helping and serving. That should be their leadership role. So yeah, a lot of people do struggle with that statement when I say, you know, you need to stand behind us. And a lot of people say, no, Lynn, we stand beside you. And I said, no, you stand behind us, you push us forward, you break down the barriers that we're encountering. And once we're equal, then you can stand beside us. And then a lot of people understand that when I say that. So I think the leadership role should be that of helping. And I think that helping and serving the more oppressed. Always go to, you know, I have my concept called follow the turtle. Is if we're all following the slowest person, then we'll all benefit. So I like that concept, follow the turtle. I think that settler people, Canadians, they need to allow us to define what we need. We don't need false generosity. Please let us define what we need. Like I remember as a child, people giving my mother things that she didn't need. And she needed milk and she needed flour. She didn't need some of the things that they were giving us. They were clearing out their closet, I guess. So we really need to let Indigenous people define what we need and then act from there. So I get a lot of people say, well, what can I do to help? Well, donations are always welcome. Our food bank should be full. If you have any money or funds, you can give it to a mother. I always say give it to a mother with children. So do your critical thinking. So allyship and reconciliation shouldn't be done for the purpose of your own career or for your own purposes.
Miigwech. And I see one question coming in, and maybe just a follow up to, you had mentioned to the role of the federal government in terms of the oppression of your own nation. So could you maybe expand and talk a little bit more of what is the role of settlers in terms of holding Canadian governments accountable?
Yes, you know, when Trudeau came in and he was sitting on the platform of reconciliation and nation to nation, so many settlers were joyful, and it made me ill because, you know, I have done, you know, my dissertation was on the long process of Canada refusing to modify the land claim process. And then when I would see the joy on their face, it actually made me even more ill. Because they didn't understand the issues. So Canada has been since 1973 with the Calder decision, they unilaterally drafted a land claim process policy, and then it was modified a few times. And then when Trudeau came in, he modified it as well. But all these changes are really, they're not genuine changes. It's more like obfuscation, it's rhetoric. He's not really honoring the nation to nation agreement or the process. Nation to nation means that, for example, if there's 100 acres of land, the settler people get 50 acres and the indigenous people get 50 acres. And from our 50 acres, from the resources, we get to build our own education, our own childcare, our own healthcare, our own housing, without interference, right? And that's not that is not what is happening. So Justin Trudeau has redefined the nation to nation. He's relegated, and he's going to be relegating and continuing to relegate Indigenous First Nation communities to municipalities, which is far from nation to nation, right? Nation to nation means equal sharing of land and resources. It doesn't mean here's a handout. So I think I answered your question. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's great, Miigwech. And I see we have some questions starting to roll in, some really great ones. So the first one is the question about, what about the case of competing land claims or lateral violence? So what is the role of the ally in those situations? So in cases where the most oppressed may be being oppressed by more powerful Indigenous groups. So is there a role for allies in terms of Indigenous disputes or conflict?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because the Algonquins are in that situation. Canada has divided us into Ontario and Quebec Algonquins, and some of the Quebec Algonquins are really upset because the Algonquins in Ontario may be treating away their land, because of course Algonquins in Quebec do have land on the other side of the river. And so I had a really disturbing experience with that recently with a radio announcer who was interviewing Wendy Jocko, the chief of Pikwakanagan, about the issue with disputes between the Ontario and Quebec Algonquin. And this radio announcer said to Wendy, shouldn't the Quebec Algonquins get some of the money that you're going to get from that land claim? And that really upset me, because what that radio announcer did was polarize a group of people against one another. They pitted the Algonquins of Ontario and Quebec against one another, instead of focusing on Canada and Prime Minister Trudeau. Right? They shifted the focus and blamed the oppressed people, the people who are trying to get a better life, to make a better life. And so I think with settler people, what they need to do is they need to focus on their government, their prime minister. This is not our government. This is your government that's doing it to us, and that's where your focus should be. So you need to do your research on the local people. You need to find the critical thinkers. The locus of control is internal. You need to do the work, the reading, and the thinking.
Miigwech, and I think part of what I'm hearing too is the lateral violence is only a symptom of settler colonialism and oppression. So it's really about focusing on the root of that problem, which doesn't lie within Indigenous communities.
Yes, they shouldn't be building on it or pointing their fingers and saying, you can't even get along, they can't even get along. The lateral violence is a symptom of colonization and genocide.
And for the next question, Monica wants to know if you could elaborate on the difference between IK, Indigenous knowledge, and anti-colonial knowledge.
Okay, so thanks for that question. So Indigenous knowledge emerges from Indigenous people, from their philosophies, from from our worldviews, from the land. You know, there was a knowledge system that pre-existed European arrival, and we did have our own creation story. For example, we had our own structures of governance, such as the wampum diplomacy, such as the clan system of governments. We had songs. So Indigenous knowledge focuses on that, it celebrates that, highlights that, and uses that as frameworks of understanding. Whereas anti-colonial knowledge is against what the state is doing to us. So challenging sex discrimination in the Indian Act, challenging the land claim process, they are all anti-colonial acts, and they're very important acts. So I would never say one is more important than the other. They're both important within the context of genocide, but it's important for settler people to understand the difference between Indigenous knowledge and anti-colonial knowledge and reflect on that as they're learning and moving forward. A lot of people make the mistake in thinking that the only knowledge system we have is anti-colonial, and that's not true. That's not true. We have our own creation story, and it's really, really beautiful. It takes a while, but most people catch on to that. You know, we need to encourage those cognitive structures, and eventually people catch on.
And so this next question, I think feeds in a little bit of thinking too about that relationship between Indigenous knowledge and anti-colonialism. So Pamela asked, can you please explain the deeper meaning between the two-row wampum belt?
Sure, the Tupelo wampum belt is so important. You know, it's used now even internationally as a model to understand the relationship between Indigenous people and settler people. And you know, one of my teachers is John Burroughs, who's Anishinaabe. But the two-row wampum belt is also really associated with the Haudenosaunee people, but it was a part of the Anishinaabe culture as well. And so the two-row wampum belt is 2 rows of purple, and then it's in between the 2 rows of purple are 3 rows of white. And the 2 rows of purple talk about the Indigenous nations and the European nations going down a river with their own knowledge systems. Indigenous people have their own governance structures, their own language, their own childcare processes. And same as European people, they have their own court system and their own prisons. And the idea is that as we travel down the river in our respective vessels, we are not supposed to interfere with one another. But of course, we have to have a relationship with one another, and the moral code that we use to mediate that relationship is that of peace, friendship, and respect. And so that's really, really special. I really like that. And what's really important is that that should be the fundamental relationship between Indigenous people and the federal government. That should be mediating the nation-to-nation relationship, but it also goes into our homes and into our communities. That's every relationship should be mediated with that moral code intact. You know, morals predate human arrival too. That's one of our teachings, right?
And so if I'm understanding you correctly, it's not that settlers can't work to understand Indigenous knowledges, but that really it's very important that they themselves understand anti-colonial knowledge to be able to hold their own governments and communities to account, so that the vision behind the two-row wampum can come to fruition. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And just to close, we'll have one final question. So Linda asks and says she's been hearing from local elders that the key is empowering Indigenous youth, and wants to know if you have any specific advice about how allies can support Indigenous youth in particular.
Wow, we live in an economic paradigm, so a lot of the youth, they need resources, right? They need help paying for their education. They need tutors, kind people, understanding people. They need people who won't call them names and judge them. Um, um, Role modeling. Role modeling is such an important way of learning and teaching. Be a good role model. Be kind. Kindness. Be a soft place for them to land.
Well, miigwech, Dr. Gehl, for all your wisdom. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Baxter, who's our VP of Indigenous Initiatives.
Miigwech. Thank you so much. This was quite a lot to take in. I really appreciated I'm going to watch it again. It'll be posted tomorrow on our YouTube channel, so I'll have a chance to come back to that because, like was pointed out, and I recognize, this is a lifetime of work that you condense down into 25 minutes, one little sliver of it for us. So I do appreciate your ability to do that, but also the time you took to do that with us today. I would like to formally say Chimigwech, Dr. Gehl, for your words today. Chief Williams and Chief Collins for your continued support of our young people and our more mature people who are also attending universities, colleges, high schools, and elementary schools around the systems, but also the work that you do within your community and the communities that surround your communities as well. Miigwech, Elder Twans Hines, for your beautiful prayer today. We have a lot of hard work ahead of us, not just over the next couple of weeks, but every day, whether we're in our place of work or whether we're out in the community. So I really appreciate you feeding our soul and our spirits when we get the opportunity to see you. Thank you, Dr. Ray, for your very skilled moderation of the Q&A and for teasing out some of those critical points that we'd like to think further on. And for President McPherson, Chimigwech, also for your support of the work that we do and your leadership of the university. We do hope that many of you will be able to continue to participate at our upcoming Truth and Reconciliation events over the next 2 weeks. We have them on our calendar at the Lakehead University website, also under the Indigenous Initiatives tab under events. You'll be able to find, I think we have about 16 or 18 events planned over the next 2 weeks, but also many events happening in your own communities. So keep a lookout for those, check your social media, and be present along. I'm not going to say alongside, but I'm going to say one step behind. But certainly, it is important to be joining into coming together as part of the community. And tomorrow, I'd like to invite you to join us tomorrow as we get a chance to interact with Anishinaabe Kwe, Nicole Richmond, who is a Juris Doctor, as she speaks around treaties, curriculum, and Anishinaabe pedagogy. And for those of you coming from the Boer-Alaskan Faculty of Law, I believe she is in her first course teaching with the Faculty of Law at Lakehead University. So that will be tomorrow at lunch. On that note, it is 1 p.m. and I'd like to say Chimigwech, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Agig Wabman.